Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com. I'm Craig Smoak on this Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024, and we are doing things a little bit differently this week. It is National Signing Day week, also the end of the regular season. So we're going to have our normal Bearcast for you, but we're coming to you live from location today. We will be back together in studio on Wednesday for National Signing Day coverage beginning at 8 a.m. So be locked in for that. Just right off the top, I want to message you and tell you that so that you're aware tomorrow that there will be coverage here on Sikkim365.com. But today for the Bearcast, we are our separate abodes, and we'll link up tomorrow. But I'm Craig Smoak, as I mentioned right off the top, joining you as always, and also joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer of Sikkim365.com. And Grayson, the Bears closed out the regular season in a major way, 45-17, a huge win over Kansas that we'll be breaking down here. Also be taste testing a little bit on National Signing Day, just a little bit of a preview of what's to come tomorrow. But 8-4, finishing out the regular season, 6-3 in Big 12 play. I guess first things first, how was your Thanksgiving? And also, how did you take in what you saw from the Bears this past weekend before we dive into it?
Thanksgiving was great as usual. I mean, getting to just be with the family, spend some time with friends, and of course, the food. The food is always the highlight of my Thanksgiving, as I'm sure it is for many people as well. But yeah, it was a really good week. I mean, you kind of start off, going into this game for Baylor against Kansas, and there were a lot of questions. Is Baylor going to be able to finish the season strong? They're playing what a lot of people call the best team in the Big 12. And, Baylor played up to a level that I don't know that we've seen all year. And so it was really impressive and something that I know we're going to dive deeper into. But yeah, good Thanksgiving. Good to see Baylor get another win, continue this hot streak, and just continue momentum going into signing day and, of course, the transfer portal.
So if I had told you before the start of the year they were going to finish 8-4 and they were going to beat TCU and they were going to beat Texas Tech like a drum and they were going to, obviously bring back Dave Aranda and all these various things, what would you have thought? I mean, you were somebody who was probably a bit more positive than most, and even then you had 6 wins, I think, when we made our predictions. So everybody kind of felt like that was sort of tapping out, maybe 7 wins, something like that. But 8-4 regular season. What are your thoughts now that we're actually here? It's not prognosticating or predicting. It's like it's what they've actually gone out and done. What does this mean?
It's such an interesting thing, bringing this up because, they started the year 2-4. And yes, in the offseason, I had them going 6-6. I think I had them winning a bowl game. So eventually getting that 7th win, but not till a bowl game. And so I think it just was a weird thing where you looked at their schedule and it ended up being that the first half of the schedule was much tougher than the second half, even though when you looked at it in the preseason, it was like, oh, the first half is where they're going to have to win some games. But I will say, as we got to that bye week and we focused on that Texas Tech game, I think that was the game that I looked at and said, if Baylor can win that game, there's a path to them not only making a bowl game, but winning much more than that. And since that point on, I've picked them to win every single game because it just felt like the momentum was gathering and the teams they were playing were a little bit weaker, especially on the defensive side. And Baylor fully took advantage of that. I think Baylor improved a ton throughout the year. And truthfully, they could have won a few more games. Like you look at the Colorado game, you look at the BYU game, easily can flip those. But at the end of the day, an 8-4 season is a fantastic one. It's something that not many people projected. You can say, oh, it's still underachieving, but I would say they were 5.5. That was their win total mark by Vegas, 5.5 wins. They drastically overperformed. That's a big difference when you're able to get 2 more wins than what you were projected to get, 2.5 more wins, really. So yeah, this is outstanding. I don't think many people could have predicted this before the season, but we're here. And what it means is momentum. And what it means is positivity going into a very key stretch for any football team, and especially for Baylor, as they have some needs in the transfer portal and they need to finish their class strong coming up here tomorrow.
Yeah, and anybody saying that they underachieved, I mean, there was, I mean, not a whole lot they could have done differently. Yeah, the Colorado game could have gone differently. I guess the BYU game, in a sense, could have gone differently. But you weren't going to beat Iowa State. You weren't better than Utah when you played. So maybe a couple of games difference. And then there's also, that whole like, well, we could have won. Well, you could also lost the TCU game. So I don't know. 8-4 seems pretty good. And I get that everybody would love 10-2 as an average, but I don't think that that's really where we live right now. So I think 8-4 is pretty dang good and should be celebrated. And obviously, there's a lot of people fired up about it, and for good reason. So let's get into the game itself, because there was a lot of points scored here, and we will close out by breaking down this final game and then getting into your mailbag. But we'll also have a few notes on signing day and just kind of what to expect tomorrow, depending on time. I guess before we do get fully in, we are set as far as the Big 12 championship game goes. Arizona State and also Iowa State will be playing for that in Arlington this weekend. You have any hot thoughts on Arizona State, Iowa State? Baylor had a chance to get in there at the end and just did not get the right combination of teams. It was never all that realistic to begin with, but any thoughts on where the Big 12 has found itself here at the end of the year before we get into Kansas?
I like that there's a former Big 12 team, a team that's been in the Big 12 for a long time in it, along with a new team. It's kind of cool, right? It's an interesting wrinkle. And to see Arizona State be picked last or second to last in the Big 12 by most, if not all people, you might have mixed in Houston in there. But they were picked to be, one of the worst teams in the Big 12. And now they find themselves at 10-2. And besides Baylor, they're the hottest team in the Big 12 now. And so I think it's fascinating to see that. I think on the flip side, you see an Iowa State team that truthfully has not really impressed me at all over the second half of the season. They've just kind of been surviving at times, getting blown out at other times, just not really looking like the team that I think we saw early in the season, but they're still here. They still somehow made it to this point. They beat Kansas State over the weekend in Farmageddon, which was really impressive, I think, for them, because that was a game I fully expected them to just find a way to lose, and they were able to come out, get a win, get themselves in the Big 12 championship game. And now and Arizona State's missing their top receiver going into this game, who means a lot to them, and Jordan Tyson. And so I think things set up really well for Iowa State to actually win this thing, even though the vibes and the momentum, and I think a lot of people are going to be picking Arizona State because of that. I just have this weird gut feeling that this is the year that Iowa State actually gets it done.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's unfortunate that you're right, honestly, because I don't know
Yeah.
that I want Iowa State fans to be bragging about a Big 12 football championship, but I think that's a good shot, especially with Jordan Tyson hurt. So we will see on that, but I bring it up because that is the Big 12 title game. Baylor finishing fifth overall in the Big 12 standings, so that is official. Tiebreakers helping with that, and then they, obviously lost to Colorado, lost to Kansas. Lost to BYU. Lost to who else am I thinking about here? That was ahead of them: Colorado, BYU, and
Iowa State.
Iowa State. And then you didn't play, obviously, Arizona State. So finished behind those four, but pretty respectable. Finished ahead of TCU and ahead of Tech and ahead of even K-State and Kansas, who was picked above you in the poll, and West Virginia was picked above you in some polls. So you finished ahead of a number of teams that you thought you might, but you had to finish ahead of Utah, finished ahead of UCF. So Oklahoma State, I mean, they finished higher at fifth, and I think a lot of people thought so. This season, record-wise, maybe even who you beat and where you finished, all I think exceeding most people's expectations this season. So just kind of a look in there here at the end of where everything sat. And why did it sit where it sat? I mean, they could have finished behind Texas Tech and TCU and could have actually finished in like ninth if things had gone a little bit differently on Saturday. But that was part of the beauty of beating Kansas, was you stayed where you were. So let's get into how they beat Kansas and what was a blowout finish to the regular season, which I don't think, talking about not expecting things, I don't think anybody necessarily expected 45-17. Grayson, a lot of people, including myself, picking against the Bears. And for me, it was simply just, I think part of it is just I see them so up close, right? So I'm almost more critical on the things that I know better. And so just the winning streak that they had been on, not expecting a very good home crowd, which I was right about that. and that not really playing into things, and just the fact that Kansas had played such good teams. I went Kansas, but I know others picked Baylor, and rightfully so. I misjudged completely because I did not see them winning this fashion. Were you surprised by kind of how it unfolded here?
I really don't think you were far off in kind of your projection, because if you picked a close game in this one, I don't think it necessarily mattered too much which side you were on. I think most people thought this would be a close game. And, I had Baylor winning by, I think, 3 or 4 points. So, a really close game in the long run. But I expected Kansas to score a lot more. I think the thing that I kept coming back to last week was this simple idea that when Baylor's played a bad defense, or should I say a defense rated outside the top 50 analytically, they're averaging 41 points per game. And they showed up and hung 45 on Kansas because Kansas is rated as like the number 65 defense in the country. So Baylor continued to just absolutely demolish bad defenses all year. Like, that's been consistent for them, especially during the back half of this season. So what I didn't anticipate was the fact that Baylor's defense was going to play so well and get the turnovers necessary, because they haven't forced turnovers all year. And it's gotten better over recent weeks, but now they're starting to force turnovers. You saw Devin Bobby making plays in this game, which I know we'll get to, but I think that if you take away those turnovers, this is probably maybe a 10-point game that Baylor wins. But because of all the turnovers, it turns into just this complete blowout that, honestly, the scoreboard is even less than what the game looked like. Like, this could have easily been a 52-17 game had Baylor decided to go score on that last drive. So this game was not competitive, not close, especially in the second half. Baylor just kind of ran away from them, and a big part of that was the turnovers and then just efficiency on offense and timely plays by the defense.
So while Baylor finished 8-4 and 6-3, Kansas with the loss 5-7, 4-5 in Big 12 play, which is actually very respectable given where they started. But that 5-7 stings because that was the end of their season. And for as much as it looked like the writing was on the wall earlier in the year that they would not have a postseason, with that second half run, they put themselves in position to do just that. And so to fall short so abruptly, I think had to sting in a way you weren't really expecting to be stung at the end of the year, because you didn't think there was going to be any hope to begin with. And so then you got your hopes all the way back up, only to be disappointed again. So just interesting that they just got their season cut off just like that. It was over on Saturday and in that fashion. But Baylor lives to play again, and we await the selection show on Sunday to figure out where they are going to end up. But how did they end up here? Well, let's get into the game itself. Kansas got the ball first in this one, in front of a paltry crowd of Thanksgiving weekend out of McLean Stadium. Bears winners of 5 straight. KU obviously coming in on a heater with 4 straight games against top 25 opponents, including 3 straight wins when what really could have been 4 straight wins, as we talked about last week. But here's how this one basically went down. Jayhawks get the ball first, and they are able to drive it into Baylor territory and a handful of plays thanks to some Devin Neal runs early on, which you're expecting to get a lot of him on the day, but really didn't matter. Like a lot of things Kansas did in the long run didn't mean much. A lot of what mattered coming out of Saturday was things that Baylor was involved with directly. So here, KU with a nice start, getting near the red zone for the Bears, but have to settle for a 38-yard field goal, and Tabor Allen misses from 38 out on the first drive of the game. So just like that, looked like you were probably going to dig an early hole of some sort, and instead you get off the field having given up no points. And kind of the theme of the day for the defense was they did bend in some cases, but turnovers or a missed field goal kept points from getting on the board, and that was the most important thing. It didn't really matter. It's like the old defenses, like give up 700 yards, but if you don't give up but like 24 points, then who cares how many yards you gave up, right? So I gave up some yards in this drive, but didn't give up any points thanks to the missed field goal.
And this was actually one of those drives, which we'll talk about through maybe the first 3 or 4 drives for Kansas. But Jalen Daniels looked really good early on in this game. He was making some throws that I was like, man, I didn't know that he really had that in his game. And on this drive, actually, he threw probably his best throw of the day to his tight end in the corner of the end zone, and he just couldn't quite get his foot in. It was just half his foot was out of bounds. And they had to sell for that field goal and missed it, of course. But yeah, that was kind of alarming, right? They were moving the football. Jalen Daniels was throwing the ball really well. They were running the football. Kind of thought, after seeing that, oh, hey, we're kind of set for a shootout, but it was nice to see Baylor be able to keep them off the board. Missed field goal. That's just convenient timing, but something that, when you look back on the season, Baylor's special teams was so much better than most of the teams they played, and that really helped propel them, especially in this game.
So the Bears would get the ball back after would get the ball the first time on the day after the Kansas missed field goal. Would be able to drive towards around midfield or so, but a big sack on 1st and 10 of Sawyer Robertson pushes the Bears back a ways as far as just trying to get done when they get done. So 1st and 10 turns into a 2nd and 16, which is a 3rd and long, and eventually another sack of Sawyer Robertson completely halts this drive. So not a good start for the offensive line as they are forced to punt. And it's two opening drives, one for both teams, and no points after both of these opening drives, but kind of an ominous start for the offensive line and Sawyer Robertson here.
It was, and that was a little bit not shocking, but it hadn't really been common for Baylor to give up many sacks so far, especially in the second half of the season. But Kansas is pretty good at it, and they showed it early on. Baylor was able to kind of weather that storm a little bit, though, as they calmed down up front for sure. But yeah, this drive was kind of just derailed by that. There weren't going to be many drives that were derailed, but this one definitely was because of those sacks.
So Kansas drives the ball down, misses the field goal, gets a couple sacks, forces you to punt, and then they go 7 plays, 83 yards. Devin Neal, a big 38-yard run on 3rd down and 1. And then a few plays later, Devin Neal, 19 yards, touchdown. So he has a huge game already starting off here, and he's one of the best running backs in the country. And certainly a guy that we'll be seeing playing on Sundays and whatnot. But here early on, making his presence felt. And, I talked about the first drive being kind of ominous, the way they moved it and then got some sacks. But here they strike, and it's 7-0 Jayhawks.
Right, and this was the play that they called holding and then picked up the flag, which, I mean, I know it happens sometimes. I guess I haven't seen it enough, but I feel like this has happened at Baylor home games a little bit much this year, where guys are throwing flags and then picking them up, especially on plays that, they went back and, me looking at the play, I mean, it's pretty close to holding. I mean, if you call it on the field, I don't know how you're able to pick that up with no review or anything like that, but hey, it is what it is. Kansas ended up scoring on that drive, but had that flag been thrown, it would have been interesting to see if Kansas still would have been able to score, as Baylor's playing so well in the red zone.
Well, college officiating is not very good in general, and for a multi-million-dollar enterprise, they need to spend some of that money on actually having real officials. We don't need conference-only officials calling different things for different leagues and different styles of games. There needs to be a standard, but I think this year, every year shines a flashlight on it, but this year especially, just god-awful officiating across the board. I know every league thinks they have the worst. The SEC's certainly got a case for the worst, but you watch the Big 12, it's ridiculous every single weekend. The Pac-12 was known for being terrible, and I just think it's become kind of a thing that hangs over the sport, if anything. And if you're one of those like college or pro, there's a lot of reasons to think pro nowadays that you didn't used to maybe think, like NIL and all that stuff. People just don't care about it or not interested in it or find it annoying or whatever. But the officiating part of it too, like watching a Monday night game, seeing how quickly they come to decisions. Now they got the big booth, the big headquarters and all that. So it's a different beast, but college officials, there's got to be something done to get better. I mean, get better, because there's calls that just make you scratch your head and calls that sometimes come out of thin air. So anyways, Kansas gets the benefit of the doubt there, able to turn it into a touchdown. Bears get the ball back, and they go score as well. 6 plays, 75 yards. A little bit of Bryson Washington before Sawyer Robertson hits Monterey Baldwin for a highlight reel touchdown catch, and good to see Monterey Baldwin getting involved here. He will get even more involved in just a moment, but on 3rd and 1, a big 36-yard touchdown, and the Bears are on the board 7-7.
Great to see Monterey Baldwin get involved here. I know Ashton Hawkins, he hurt his hand. I think he ends up with a broken hand of some kind in this game after, a short screenplay that he took for 13, 14 yards. He immediately grabbed his hand. I know he's been posting on Instagram, his hand in a cast and stuff like that. And that allowed Monterey to have a bigger role in this game. And he played so well. I was so happy for him on senior night. We're going to get to him a little bit more, but this was a perfect throw by Sora Robertson, perfect route by Monterey Baldwin, and a great job by Jake Spavital going into this game, recognizing mismatches and taking advantage of them. Kansas's safeties are not very good, especially in coverage, and Baylor definitely took advantage of that the whole game, really.
So it is 7-7. KU gets the ball back. They get to around midfield. He had a personal foul on Matt Jones, but Devin Bobby with his first of 2 interceptions. Jalen Daniels has been good down the stretch. He was not good during the first part of the season. He's been much better here of late, but while he started off pretty well, he did turn the ball over a couple times, which was a killer, and this was the first of those. So Devin Bobby gets on the board, and the Bears get the ball back as they are going to quickly turn that into a 2-play 70-yard drive because you had Monterey Baldwin with a big chunk of yardage, 39 yards from Sawyer Robertson on the touchdown after a big Dawson Pendergrass run just prior to that. So Bears strike quickly off the turnover, take the lead 14-7 as Monterey Baldwin with a basically almost identical catch, nearly identical route. I know he talked in the post game how there was like a slight variation, but it was nearly identical. The play itself was very similar. Another great catch by Monterey, and he's living it up on senior day. It's 14-7 Bears. They've got a turnover. They've got some momentum now, and this is a great start.
Terrible throw by Jalen Daniels on the interception. Devin Bobby just kind of waited for it to fall right into his lap, but you got to make those plays. Baylor hasn't made enough of those, it feels like, at times this year, but Devin Bobby surely made up for that in this game. He's about to have a big-time play later in the game as well, but this was nice. They turn right around. Baylor capitalizes. They turn that turnover into an immediate touchdown. Like you said, this play was on repeat to Monterey Baldwin. Another perfect throw by Sora Robertson. Great catch by Monterey. Same play, attack the same guy, the same safety in coverage, and it just was not close. And that was great to see by Baylor. Again, just attack those mismatches and continue to make them pay for running, defenses where you're playing, your safety and coverage against a guy like Monterey Baldwin. That's where you want to take advantage of matchups, and Baylor surely did that in this one.
So KU down 14-7 goes on a pretty nice drive, 15 plays, 67 yards. A lot of Jalen Daniels throwing it around, a lot of Devin Neal, of course, as well, a bunch of first downs and third down conversions, and they get all the way down to the inside the Baylor 10 and unable to punch it in as the defense bows up its neck on multiple plays to force the field goal. And Tabor Allen good from 26 yards out, but not really a win for KU here because they cut into the lead, but they're still trailing, and they had multiple opportunities. First and goal at the 10, second and goal at the 8, third and goal at the 8, and then obviously kick the field goal there. So a nice job by the Baylor defense to limit the damage.
This is the definition of complementary football. You get a touchdown, you go up 14-7. Now it's time to try to build on that lead, and Kansas had a good drive. They drove all the way down the field, ran some time off the clock, ran a lot of plays, but at the end of the day, Baylor held them to 3 points. Massive. This was a massive drive in this football game because it felt like Kansas was definitely going to tie this thing up, but they were unable to capitalize in the red zone. Baylor did such a good job of that all game, and this drive was kind of a prime example of that as, they had first and goal at the 10, and they only got 2 yards from there and then had to kick a field goal. They weren't able to run the football, weren't able to complete a pass, and Baylor gets a huge stop. And, you still give up points and you still give up a long drive, but in a game like this where you're expecting to score in the high 30s or 40s, holding a team to another field goal try after the one they forced them to kick earlier is a huge win.
So the Bears get to stop, and they are able to, stop in the sense that they don't give up the touchdown. So they were able to take their lead and, with the ball back in their hands, extend that lead as a result of limiting the damage and then obviously capitalizing on having the ball back as they go 8 plays, 82 yards. More Bryson Washington, Sawyer Robertson throwing it around to Josh Cameron and also Monterey Baldwin. Big chunk of yardage for Bryson Washington on 2nd and 3, gets you into the red zone. And then a couple of plays later, Sawyer Robertson to Josh Cameron, who has been your best wide receiver this season. And one of those guys that has stepped up as a difference maker for you on 3rd and 3, 14-yard touchdown. And the Bears are up 21-10.
Josh Cameron was awesome in this game. This drive was his best drive of the day. Had this touchdown, of course, with the walk-in after he caught it, which was really cool after he broke the tackle. You could kind of tell he took this game personally against Mello Dotson, who's one of the best cornerbacks in the Big 12. And he won the matchup pretty easily in this game. I was really impressed by that. He was awesome. You know, for them to be able to get a guy like him back next year is going to be really key for this offense and key for this team. He's been so good, has taken a huge step in the right direction as far as just his playmaking at receiver, his playmaking in special teams. He's become just such a valuable weapon for this offense. And this was a great drive to see that. And also, you know, that walk-in for a touchdown, that's the kind of stuff I like seeing. You know what I mean? There's just a swagger to this team. There's this competitiveness to this team that they did not have a year ago.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're having fun and they're showing off a little bit, but not in like a over the top type of way, but just in a like, hey, I made a big play. I'm going to enjoy it and kind of show you as well. But like, again, not anything that's negative or nasty or anything like that. Just having fun playing football and being a little cocky about it, and nothing wrong with that. That's what good teams do, and Baylor is a good team right now, so cool to see the swagger from Josh Cameron. Both teams now, 21-10 ball game, will exchange 3-and-outs, and then Kansas gets the ball back, and they go on a little bit of a drive. They have some time on the clock, have a situation where they are able to convert a 3rd-down-and-7 and are nearing midfield. But then Jalen Daniels, big conversion to Davida Aohafi Noah, a 40-yard run, but Tevin Williams steps up in the midst of a massive play, forces the fumble. Matt Jones is able to recover for the Bears, and what was a drive brewing for the Jayhawks that was maybe going to eat into the lead, and what was obviously a big play in the making, all of a sudden gets turned on its head. And you talk about complimentary football. Well, here's another example of that. A huge play by the defense as Tevin Williams III forces a fumble, and Matt Jones recovers to give them the ball back to end the Kansas threat before halftime. And the Bears won't fully capitalize on this, but a huge play, like I said, by the defense. Let's just start with that.
Love seeing that from Tevin Williams. He's been kind of banged up all year. He's just kind of been in and out of the lineup, but he's gotten more consistent over the last few weeks, just getting on the field and making plays and being really their third cornerback and playing a big role. So to see him come out and make a play like this, first of all, I don't know what the Kansas receiver was doing here. He easily could have ran out of bounds, but he tried to embrace the contact, and it was a mistake. And so he ends up fumbling the ball. Matt Jones, of course, gets on it. It's just a huge play. I mean, right, there's a minute 24 left in the half. Kansas is trying to go down and score some points of some kind to cut this to a 1-score game. They're unable to, and so it allows the Bears to maintain this 11-point lead at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely huge swing of momentum there as the Bears had the momentum, but KU hoping to grab some before halftime, and it gets ripped away. But the Bears don't capitalize. They go on a 10-play drive. But then there towards the end, Sawyer Robertson gets sacked on 3rd-and-10, and it leads to a 53-yard field goal attempt with time ticking off the clock, and Isaiah Hankins off the upright, no good. And so kind of deflating a little bit from the standpoint that you had an opportunity to add on to your lead. But instead, you go into the locker room up 21-10 at halftime. You get the ball to start the second half. So how you feeling about things at this point? A bummer end, but still feel like they're pretty much in control and playing well here.
Right. I mean, if you would have told me, Baylor has an 11-point lead at halftime, I would have taken it. Absolutely. And Baylor was going to get the ball back as well to start the second half. So you felt pretty good about where they were. I will say this is the kind of play. I know Sora's trying to make a play. I understand that, but it's also one of those things where you're losing 7 yards here and making this, going from a, 46, 45-yard field goal to a 53-yard field goal is kind of a big difference there, especially when there's only 8 seconds left. I would have liked to have seen him just get rid of the football, just take an incompletion, then kick an easier field goal. Doesn't happen. He was really lucky he actually got on this football as well, because it just took a perfect bounce and he was able to gather it with one arm. So they got very lucky. They were able to even have a shot at a field goal. Hankins missed it, 53 yarders in college. That's a tough field goal, a very tough field goal. So I'm not too upset about that miss there. But yeah, going into halftime, I think 11-point lead, you would have taken it.
All right, rolling to the second half here. Bears got the ball to start the third quarter. 9 plays, 74 yards. A lot of Bryson Washington, a little bit of Robertson to Cameron here. But ultimately, it's the what would become 1,000-yard rusher on the day. Needed a bunch of yards, needed like 170-something yards going into the day to get to 1,000. Bryson Washington would cross that threshold, which we can talk more about, but a big drive here and a big touchdown to blow this thing open, 28-10 Bears after the 10-yard score from the talented redshirt freshman.
And this was the drive where you just kind of felt like not necessarily the game was over, but that Baylor was going to score kind of whatever they wanted to score in this game. Because, plain and simple, Baylor got into 2 3rd-and-1s on this drive. And on each of those 3rd-and-1s, they easily converted. They were just winning up front. There was nothing Kansas could do at all to stop the run. That would continue through the second half and was a great sign of things to come for Baylor. And one of those things that, when this Baylor team can run the football, they are really, really difficult to stop. And they were running as much as they wanted to really in this game and specifically on this drive.
So 28-10, KU gets the ball back. Defense forces a 3-and-out. So now you can smell the blood in the water here. And, speaking of blood in the water, after getting the stop, after having extended their lead, they may turn this one into a blowout, 35-10, because they score again, 7 plays, 62 yards, a touchdown pass from Sawyer Robertson to Dawson Pendergrass for 20 yards, caps off this drive as Pendergrass got the ball rolling with a couple of runs. Robertson, a couple of passes to Baldwin. And then even Richard Reese makes an appearance here before it's eventually Robertson to Pendergrass. And Pendergrass, a very good complimentary back, a very good back in his own right, but especially good complimentary to what Bryson Washington has brought to the table. You talk about looking at next year, and we'll have months to look ahead, but that's certainly a backfield. Robertson, Washington, Pendergrass that you feel pretty good about if they can hold it all together. But Pendergrass here, the young man from Mineola, makes it 35-10 halfway through the third quarter.
Great play call here by Jake Spavital because it was 3rd and 2. And like we mentioned, Baylor was just having all kinds of success running the ball on 3rd down. And they just had Dawson Pendergrass roll on a swing pass to the right. And Sawyer looked down the field for a second and then threw the swing pass out to Pendergrass. And all he had to do was make one guy miss. And it was a touchdown. And he did that with ease. Pendergrass, really good player. Never goes down on the first contact. Really good pass catcher. Like you said, very nice compliment to what Bryson Washington brings to the table. And great to see him, turn a short pass into a 20-yard touchdown. Because again, I know we're spoiled by it this year, but it's something that we haven't seen the last few years. And so to see guys catch the ball and create yards after catch, really, really important and something this team has thrived at.
So I'm going to kind of fast forward in parts here just for the sake of time, but you can go back when you need to. I'll try to keep little breaks here to make it somewhat reasonable. But KU would respond. They weren't going away just that quickly. 3 plays, 75 yards, kind of a letdown, honestly, that you go up big and then you immediately turn around and give up such a quick touchdown. But Devin Neal, big run, and Lawrence Arnold, eventually a 14-yard run for a touchdown. Carves back into the lead as KU strikes quickly, 35-17, just a 3-play drive for them with chunks of 48, to start the drive, 13 and 14. So defense got ate up a little bit there. Bears get the ball back, and they say, "Forget this. We're not going to let this thing get closer than it already is." They take the lead back even further with another touchdown to make it 42-17. So completely negate what KU just accomplished. They do so with a 9-play, 74-yard drive. Had a penalty on here that put you into a 3rd and 7, but a big run from Sawyer Robertson picked up the first down, and then Bryson Washington took it the rest of the way, including right after that first down run by Robertson, a big 50-yard gain from Washington, who then eventually punched it in a couple of plays later as he was drugged down just short, but got his touchdown here, and it is 42-17 Bears after that sequence of events.
Ball game. Right when they scored that ball game, this game was over. I think you could have said that maybe a little bit earlier, but again, this drive, Kansas really felt them again, and Kansas just really their defense was done after this drive right here, and you could see them. I'm not going to say they gave up, but they just did not have the guys. They did not have the energy to really stop Baylor at this point in the game. And now, you're at 42 points. It's not even the fourth quarter yet. I mean, they were doing everything they wanted to do on offense this third quarter. Really impressive.
So KU gets the ball back, and to their credit, they're not going away to start the fourth quarter. They find themselves with the football and nearing midfield after a couple of big chunks. I mean, they were getting big chunks of yardage, but 32 yards, 23 yards. They get down to the 20-yard line, and a minute into the fourth quarter, Jalen Daniels picked off in the end zone by Devin Bobby. Bobby's second touchdown of the day, his third in the last 2 games, actually ties him now for the team lead overall. And he wipes some potential Kansas points off the board and just drives this inevitable outcome even further into its expected conclusion as they get the big turnover here. Baylor would turn around and go 11 plays, 57 yards, take 4.5 minutes off the clock, and eventually have to settle for a 40-yard field goal from Isaiah Hankins. He hits this one after the clang earlier, so that's got to feel pretty good. And they also extend their lead even further, so 45-17. KU gets the ball back and can't do anything with it. Not much they were going to do anyways with the lead that Baylor had built up. And eventually they would turn the ball back over on 4th down and 1 as the Bears defense gets a huge stop of Devin Neal to get the ball back. And then it was running out the clock for the final 6.5 minutes of this game that just bled it dry. That was pretty crazy to see them hold on to it like an anaconda, just slowly devouring their opponent. The outcome was inevitable here. But kind of just rolling through that there. I mean, a field goal by the Bears, the turnover on downs with the big 4th and 1 stop, and then just choking the life out of the clock there at the end. That was how this wrapped up, Grayson, 45-17, the way this one finished up.
And I got to, give a huge shout out here. We've talked a lot about the offense, and the defense played really well. We've talked about them in some key moments. They did give up explosive plays, but I think one thing that Dave Aranda has really wanted them to do was late in games, not give up garbage time points. And for them, I feel like one of the biggest plays of the game, just for this team in general, for this defense in general, was with 6:48 left. Yes, you're up 45-17. It's 4th and 1. Arguably the best running back in the Big 12 is getting the football. Everyone knows he's getting the football. Can you stop him? And Trevin Maai just blew this play completely up. It wasn't even close. Devin Neal had zero chance. They were not going to allow him to get this first down. Usually that's a gimme for this Kansas team. Like usually 4th and 1, they're getting that with Devin Neal, but Baylor blew it up. They get the stop, get the ball back, bleed the clock out. But I just want to give a huge shout out to the defense on that play because it was one of the plays they really haven't, in my eyes, made all year late in games. Like when they're up and the game's over, they've typically given up some touchdowns or some points, and they absolutely did not on this drive.
So that was the way it would end. I'm kind of fast forwarding, like I said, I would just for the sake of time, but you got the picture. The writing was on the wall. They closed it out in strong fashion. And yeah, it was good to see the defense blow up their necks because typically that's been a situation where, as good as things are going, even when you get the win, you've like given up a late touchdown. And that was not the case here, like it was against like Texas Tech, for example. And, it's happened a couple times this year, actually. So, huge play, huge stand, and huge emphatic win for the Bears. 45-17, the final score. 8-4 overall, 6-3 in the Big 12, fifth place finish in the league. And you end Kansas's season after they were on a really nice heater of three straight wins. On top of that, Sawyer Robertson, a week after the Houston game, where he had the turnovers, and those were not great to see. They didn't hurt the outcome at all, but you just knew that he was going to need to play better, and he would probably play better, and he sure did. 23 of 31, 310 yards, four touchdowns, a monster day for Sawyer Robertson. No turnovers, a big zero there in that column. Meanwhile, Bryson Washington needed like 180 yards, which was seemingly like probably not all that realistic because that's just a lot of yards. But I did make mention of the possibility, and he even said like, hey, he's done this actually a couple times, so 180 is not out of the question. Sure enough, 28 carries, 192 yards, two touchdowns for him. He goes double digits on the ground in terms of scores as well in the season. Youngest player in program history, the only freshman to run for 1,000 yards. Dawson Pendergrass, 11 carries, 104 yards as they ran for nearly 300 on the day. On the receiving side of things, two 100-yard receivers. Monterey Baldwin, 7 for 119 and two scores, easily his best game of the year. And then Josh Cameron, another 100-yard game for him, 8 for 102 and a score. And I should mention Pendergrass also in addition to his 100 yards on the ground, had another 20-yard catch for a touchdown. So, could go on and on, but my gosh, man, they piled up the yardage on the ground, in the air. Overall, big performances, two 100-yard receivers, two 100-yard rushers, a 300-yard, four-touchdown passer. I mean, Jake Spavital's offense is getting a lot of love, but this might have been their masterpiece as far as the regular season goes, this game right here, and it excites you about what they can do with another game to play.
It really does. And just a few more stats that I want to throw out here. Sawyer Robertson with an 88.6 QBR in this game. He now finishes the regular season as a top 5 quarterback in QBR in the entire nation. And of course, number 1 in the Big 12. He's been spectacular this year. You mentioned the numbers in this game. He's been doing this all year. For him to have a QBR of that level is really, really impressive. You mentioned the run game. They nearly ran for 300 yards on the ground against Kansas. Really impressive stuff there. They totaled over 600 yards. No team had totaled more than 507 yards against the Jayhawks this year. And Baylor just absolutely ran all over them and threw all over them as well. Monterey Baldwin becomes the 5th Baylor pass catcher to lead the team in receiving yards in a game this year. That's just how much variety that this team has been able to show, whether it's Ashton Hawkins one game, Josh Cameron the next game, Hal Presley the next game, Michael Trigg the next game. They've really mixed and matched a lot of things. They've gotten a lot out of this receiver group, and it's been a whole lot of just your turn, my turn throughout the season, with Josh Cameron, of course, being the most consistent option there. Defensively, Matt Jones, Keaton Thomas continue to play really well. I do want to mention one guy who I don't think we've talked about enough. I don't think anyone has talked about enough. But Devontae Tizino has taken a big step forward for this team. And he was a guy who was out early in the season. They got him back. I think he's provided a lot for them from a size and experience standpoint. He's a guy that's taken a big step in the right direction after what was a pretty poor year last year for him. And I think he's a guy that Baylor's going to be pretty excited about going forward into next season, especially since they're going to lose Trevin Mai, who's had a wonderful final season.
Yeah, Trevin Mai had a great finish to the regular season, a great year in general, and they're going to need some guys to step up. We'll have a lot of time to talk about that over the coming months, but a little bit of the the old finishing strong and the new starting to play well this season. Bodes for an interesting offseason where they're going to need some guys to step up, but you've got some good candidates, and it's a great combination right now with yet another game to play together. So, man, just good to see this type of an outcome and result and finish to the season. 6 straight to finish the regular season is not something anybody could have pictured. Not even Dave Aranda or Sawyer Robertson themselves would have probably thought that. But here we are. We'll await bowl announcements on Sunday. There's a number of games they could be involved in. There's the Rate Bowl, which is the day after Christmas out in Phoenix. That's the start of the Big 12 Bowl games. Hope that's not the case, because I don't think I want to spend Christmas in Phoenix. But hey, if that's where they end up, I mean, I know people don't want to go play at TCU Stadium or probably SMU Stadium, although those are both in the cards. And quite frankly, they'd be really convenient, honestly. But I don't know. We'll see where they end up. The Rate Bowl in Phoenix, the Armed Forces Bowl in Fort Worth. There's the Liberty Bowl out in Memphis, Alamo Bowl in San Antonio. And I was going to get to that. The Texas Bowl in Houston on December the 31st is a game that you would love to see them get into as well. First responder. So we will see. The Texas Bowl would be the most ideal, though, down in Houston on New Year's Eve. But we'll wait to see what happens on Sunday as far as that goes.
Right, and I have an article up on Sikkim 365, and right now the Texas Bowl is the one that's trending. A lot of people are picking that as the location for Baylor. The most realistic, or most, I guess, picked matchup is actually with LSU, which would be rather intriguing to play LSU in Houston. That crowd would probably be very LSU heavy, but it would be a lot of fun. I think that'd be a good matchup. Also a possibility Baylor plays in the Pop-Tarts Bowl against an ACC team as well. That is still, I think, somewhat in the table, as well as all the other ones that you've mentioned. We'll see, though. Right now, Texas Bowl seems to be the one trending. It looks like it'll probably be 2 Big 12 teams in the Alamo Bowl, but likely probably going to be BYU and Colorado, I would guess, or whoever loses the Big 12 championship game, if it is, Iowa State. Because, of course, in the Alamo Bowl, it's got to be a former Pac-12 team and then a Big 12 team is kind of how that would work out, if it does work out that way.
Yeah, I mean, I would selfishly love them to stay close to home around Christmas, but Phoenix or wherever, we'll see how that goes here in the next few days. But I think for the fan base, going to Houston would probably be a better turnout than trying to get them to Memphis, Tennessee or something like that. So I don't know if the bowl committee keeps that in mind or not, but I think the Houston situation would probably be the best outcome. And then Dallas, if it weren't for where they were playing in Dallas and Fort Worth, I think everybody would be on board with those as well. But we'll see. There's a few more days to go before we find that out officially and start to make our holiday plans. So real quickly, because we do have questions, kind of set the table for signing day. Any notes that we need to get to? Obviously, don't really have time for basketball this week, but in terms of National Signing Day, things to be on the lookout for, all that jazz. Right here, let's kind of delve into that part before we get into the mailbag.
Okay, so first, let's start off with the new commit that Baylor got this week. Lancaster linebacker KB Winston committed to Baylor. This was one of those things that if you were on the premium side of things, you knew he was taking a visit this weekend. He was in town for Baylor's win over Kansas. He was committed to Cal for a while in there, decided to decommit, open up his recruitment again. And from that point on, Baylor did a really good job of staying in contact with him, making him a bit of a priority, kind of a best available type, because this wasn't a guy that took an official visit. This wasn't a guy that Baylor was, really recruiting extremely hard for a little bit in there, but they came right back to him. And I think part of it for KB was his initial recruiter was Christian Robinson. And so the switch there to Jamar Chaney, I think it took some time for them to really build out their relationship. And then it got to a point where that ended up being his best relationship. And so he ends up committing to Baylor. He becomes the 4th linebacker commit, joining Caleb Burns, Bo Onu, and Trent Spence. He chose Baylor over Pitt, Cal, Arizona State, Arkansas, Illinois, Boston College, Houston. So really good offer list there. A guy who, I think when you look at kind of Baylor's linebacker situation in general, they have a lot of unproven guys aside from KT Thomas. because Matt Jones is going to be gone. So you kind of got to figure out, what that room is going to look like. We haven't seen a whole lot from Carmelo Jones or Jeremy Evans. And so I think those things have kind of resulted in Baylor making sure that they're focusing on this position. And then, of course, one of the headliners going into tomorrow is whether Caleb Burns is going to stick with Baylor or switch to Oregon and Oklahoma. I fully expect him to sign with Baylor tomorrow. So I guess that's a pretty big update. But to have him and KB Winston, along with Bo Onu and Trent Spence as the linebacker group in this class, that's a really, really good linebacker class for Jamar Chaney and Dave Aranda to work with.
Yeah, it certainly is. So that's obviously a pretty big prediction there on Caleb Burns, who's getting a lot of attention. Oregon has been trending for a really long time with him as one of his suitors. So that would be pretty massive to land the high school standout and put a bow on this class tomorrow. So are you expecting the full class to sign? Are you expecting this to be stunted? And then we can get into the mailbag here.
Currently, I expect the whole class to sign. I think they're going to end up signing all of these guys tomorrow. I actually don't think there's going to be any flips tomorrow either. So whether that's guys flipping from Baylor to somewhere else or Baylor flipping someone to the Bears, I think this class is pretty much settled right now. We'll see in February if maybe they make a late addition or something along those lines after they do the whole transfer portal process. But I think right now, the class is pretty much set. This is a really good class. They got a lot of the pieces that they've been looking for. Currently, it's number 34 class in the nation, and you need to keep room for what you want to do in the transfer portal. And I think that's a part of this equation as well. I put in predictions earlier today that I think Bryson Weber, the Ridge Point cornerback, is going to stick with Nebraska. And I think Zay Gentry, the Anna cornerback, is going to stick with SMU. I think that is more of a case that, in my eyes, at least, I think KB Winston ended up being their best available take out of the group of guys that they were still looking at. And so they went ahead and rolled with him in this class. Outside of that, maybe we get a surprise. It is signing day. Maybe something changes. But as of right now, I think Baylor just sticks with the class they got. I don't expect a flip from them, and I don't expect them to flip anyone, at least on this National Signing Day.
Yeah, I think you're okay if you don't flip anybody, so long as you don't get flipped. If you just roll in and secure what you have, I think everybody would be fine with going back to their corners after that, and just being content with getting the guys that you expected to get and not having any major surprises. And there's always the opportunity to do that later on in February if you want the big splash guys. So, a relatively drama-free signing day sounds good, just to keep the good times rolling, and hopefully can land all their big fish, and the whole we pay players thing and all that can kind of come to a conclusion for this cycle in a positive way. So, all right, let's get into the mailbag with the few minutes that we have here. I want to make sure we get into all these questions, and we'll have less time to talk about football because there won't be any games, obviously, to preview. So we'll start to dive a little bit further into basketball here in the next few weeks. But we'll also have Christmas break, and we'll kind of see how that dictates sort of the schedule and whatnot, the bowl game and everything else. But we'll be all over it, whatever the schedule ends up looking like. Starting off this week, Grayson 05. Do you have a different handle? Do you ask questions in this mailbag for
I ask
yourself?
myself questions. Yep.
Who is an under the radar player who could have a major impact next year?
So
We're already on the next year now. That's how it goes. It starts to just always be the next thing.
Yeah, it's always what's next. And I get that. A lot of these questions are what's next, even though the season isn't technically over yet. I'm going to go with the guy who I think some people have forgotten about, and he doesn't necessarily count as a transfer addition, but he is a guy that didn't play all of this year. And I expect him to play a big role next year. And that's Brendan Bett. He had a really good true freshman season for a true freshman, and he's going to come back next year with a big opportunity to take over a big role for this defense. They lose a couple guys on the defensive line, Trevin Mai and Linus Noel specifically, and I think he's a guy that fills in really nicely to what they need up front. I think he's going to be really, really good, and is a guy that they were expecting to have a big year this year. Obviously, that got derailed. But I think going into next year, he's going to be very important.
Okie Bear fan, any seniors, he says in quotation marks, that still have the COVID year to utilize and come back next year? Look like Jamal Bell and Kendrick Simpkins may have redshirted in 2020.
Right. I don't think those guys have eligibility remaining. I mean, I could be wrong. I think Simpkins would have to apply for a medical red shirt because he only played in 3 games this year. But I think Bell is out of eligibility, and Simpkins, again, would have to get a medical red shirt. And then, of course, would have to stay at Baylor to use that if he was going to use that.
So Okie, not really. Doesn't seem like it. And we're out of the COVID year now, right? I mean, in this like the last year,
This
basically.
is it.
Like so, yeah, the COVID year, there won't be any more guys that are able to have been a part of that era. We'll have aged out of that finally at this point. I mean, it was good for I think it was a good thing in the long run, but man, it created such a log jam and so much confusion. And I think it'll be good to just kind of have that on the other side of the fence now and get back to a bit more normalcy in terms of the years and where guys are. So Okie, no hopes there. It doesn't sound like for Jamal Bell or Kendrick Simpkins or anybody else. Really, it seems like. Also asked, do PFF grades of the defensive guys that played meaningful time last year show decent improvement trends this season, showing that Aranda is doing a good job at development?
So KT Thomas didn't play for Baylor last year, but to go from the JUCO level to becoming a huge part of a Big 12 defense, I think that definitely is a development thing for Dave Aranda. If you want to look at purely PFF grades, these are the guys that improved the most. Corey Gordon, Matt Jones, Trevin Mai, Jackie Marshall, Lorando Johnson, and then, of course, the guy that I mentioned earlier who probably made the biggest jump this year when it comes to PFF grades is Devontae Tizino. Who really struggled a year ago, but played much, much better this season, really came on late. So yeah, I would say that's a pretty good chunk of the defense that, made major progress this year and took their game to another level. There's other guys that didn't quite do that, but you kind of look around, like Garmin Randolph has basically been the same player his entire career. So I don't know, how much development was left there. I mean, he's been at Baylor for 6-7 years. Matt Jones is a guy who I do think took a big step forward from what happened last year. And a lot of it, talk about PFF grades, a lot of it has to do with what's in front of you and just the defensive environment in general. I think Matt Jones was plagued by that a year ago. And with a better defensive environment, I think you saw him really thrive.
Bears always win. Two questions. Who specifically could we be looking at in the portal for a backup to Sawyer in 2025? Hey, Zach Pyron's available.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that. Caden Salter is also available.
Jacob Zeno's also available.
Yeah. And here's what I'll say to this. I mean, the portal doesn't open until December 9th, so you're going to have more guys that enter the portal. I do not expect Baylor to land someone who's a starter at another school. Like the guys you just mentioned are trying to go places where they can play and start. I don't see Baylor really investing that type of NIL into that. I think it'd be more just trying to find a veteran guy who's got a year left, maybe 2 years left, that you can come in and know he will stabilize your offense if something happens to Sora Robertson. So getting a guy like, you remember when Baylor was recruiting Alan Bowman a couple years ago before he went to Oklahoma State to be a backup?
Remember when people were rooting for that to actually happen? Yeah.
Right. And here's the deal. Like he did go to a Big 12 championship, not because he was amazing, but again, he's a guy who I do think in an offense like Baylor's would just stabilize things, right? He's not going to be awful, at least in my eyes. I think that kind of level of guy is kind of what you're looking for. A guy who's played a lot of football, but can just come in and just, again, be a older veteran player so they can allow guys like Edward Griffin and Nate Bennett to develop a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm glad the Bowman thing. Yeah, I mean, I get where they're coming from with that, but yeah, I think that worked out for the
Yeah.
best. And then it's interesting to see all the Baylor quarterbacks in the portal now. Zach Pyron went to Georgia Tech. Haynes King's the man there, and they've also got another young quarterback that already passed him over, so he's in the portal. Jacob Zeno is going to be on his third team. So yeah, just it's interesting to see some of the names in there, but there will be no DeQuan Finn situation next year. I think
Right.
that's safe to say, where you're heavily investing in a potential starter, if not the guy you were thinking would be the starter. You got your guy in Sawyer Robertson. That's as clear as it's ever been. Who from this coaching staff do you think will move on, be poached, etc.? I think everybody's looking at Spavital, right? And then luckily, there's already some jobs filling up that can ease some nerves, whether that was ever anything to worry about or not. But I think he's at the top of the list of people's probably concerns. So who do you think?
I think it's important to remember that Jake Spavital is probably looking at this like, man, we're going to be really good on offense next year. Why would I go somewhere where I have to like rebuild an offense? Everyone was
Well,
all,
why go to Oklahoma? Because that was a big hot thing for a second, right? They already hired their guy anyways, and Ben Arbuckle. But why go there when Venables could be fired in a year? Like there's no stability there whatsoever.
right. And I mean, he did that with Baylor as well, what they've
Yeah,
ran in
you're
this
right. Yeah.
offseason. But one thing I would say is why would you go to Oklahoma where you have to rebuild an offense that doesn't necessarily have all the parts? Like you're going to have to go to the transfer portal and figure out a lot of things for that team. Whereas at Baylor, it's like, oh, we know what we got. You know what I mean? And so I think for him, this makes a lot of sense for him to stay one more year, put together another really good year, and then potentially be a head coach again, get another shot at being a head coach. Because I do think that's coming for him in the near future. Keenan Hall's the other name that I know people keep asking about. I mean, again, why would he leave unless he was getting an offensive coordinator job or a head coaching job? And so maybe that happens. But if that doesn't happen, I mean, he's the associate head coach right now. I just find that hard to believe that he would leave before this season. As far as other coaches, I mean, Baylor's done a great job of retaining guys and holding on to guys on the coaching staff that they want to keep. I think they could lose, a coach or two. But again, I'm not going to go in and name which coach or which guy because I think that's hard to predict. But I think the major guys that they added this offseason who just got here, I think they're going to do a good job at retaining them. So that would add Mason Miller along with Spavital and Keenan Hall.
Yeah, I think with I guess what more I'm trying to say with Spavital is why would you go and to do the exact same thing like when you've found your niche and like you
Mm-hmm.
said you're probably waiting to be a head coach. Why go jump onto another ship where it could be partially sinking when you have nothing to worry about right now, if that makes sense or not. Like
Yeah.
why hop from one year type of job to the next 1 year type of job when you got a good thing going, good quarterback, it's working, and you keep this up, and yeah, you're going to get that call to be a head coach again sooner rather than later. So yeah, it seems like he's in a better spot than going and hopping on to the next big name school and trying to start over basically in another spot. All right, Berg '09. Who do you want to face the most in our bowl game, and why? Also, how do we match up with them? So, like,
Yeah.
give us the whole bowl breakdown on the bowl that we don't even know about yet.
Yeah. So quick breakdown for this. I think Texas Bowl versus LSU is what I want to happen. I think Baylor playing a big brand is a good thing. And this is the year where LSU is definitely down. And I feel very confident that Baylor would be able to score points. Now, Baylor's probably going to give up points because LSU is still pretty explosive on offense. But who knows? Maybe some of their guys don't play in that game. Maybe they're just not locked into, they're going to go to the NFL and don't have to worry about it. And maybe that's possible and Baylor hits them at the right time. But I just think Baylor playing against a big time SEC opponent is a good thing, especially with the team that Baylor has this year, where I believe they can compete against teams like that. Again, Baylor's averaged 40 plus points against teams with the defense that are below the top 50. I'm pretty sure LSU is below the top 50 defensively. And so I think Baylor would kind of do a lot of things that they want to do on the offensive side to make that a very entertaining game and a big game, honestly. Big brand game, which I think is important in bowl season.
Blantham 4 or B Lantham 4, were you surprised at how well the defense played without both Linton and Randolph on Saturday? What did you think of their replacements?
Really liked what I saw from Kyler Jordan. He continues to be just very steady. He does a lot of things right. He's good against the run. Baylor did a really nice job with him in there, and that was pretty shocking because the last time that Garmin and Steve Linton missed a game, it was the BYU game, and they really paid for it. So you're seeing these guys develop throughout the season. Kyler Jordan, Corey Kelly came in and played some and made a big third down stop in the game. So I was happy with the group. They're still going to add some guys at the edge position. They have to. They got a big time 4-star guy coming in Kamari and Morgan. I think they're going to add at least 1 or 2 transfers at the position as well. So I expect them to be able to make up for it. But I'm also expecting Linton and Randolph to be back for the bowl game.
Rockwall Bear, if we replayed our 4 losses starting this weekend, are we going 4-0?
Great question. Are we playing this game? So you're restarting the season right now. So how these teams have been playing. Ooh, man,
I mean, they definitely would beat Utah right now.
yeah.
I think Colorado, I think, could be a fun shootout, but you'd like their chances since they, should have beat them the first time. BYU, I think you could definitely beat them. Iowa State, I mean, I think you could beat them, but I wouldn't say 4-0 like for sure. But I feel really good about your opportunity to go 4-0, and I think pretty strongly you could go at least 3-1. So yeah, I think Utah is the easiest one to say. Like, yeah, that would be a win right now. But yeah, what do you think?
R- Yeah, I mean, I think if you replayed this season with what we know now, I think Baylor's probably a 10-2 or an 11-1 team. I mean, I know that might sound crazy, but like that's kind of where we're at now, especially after looking at the rest of the Big 12. Baylor did get an unlucky draw with the fact that they had to play 3 of the top 4 teams in the Big 12. You look at schedules like TCU where they didn't have to face the top 6 teams in the league. That's pretty crazy, and that's why these uneven schedules are going to play a big part in year-to-year performance. But yeah, I think Baylor had a great shot at going 11-1 or 10-2, which means 3-1 in those games, or 2-2, something along those lines. But we also have to take into account they still would have had to win these 6 games at the end of the year as well. And that TCU game was a really close one and a really competitive one.
61-58 for life. Will Baylor land Jonte Cook or Micah Hudson out of the portal? How
If you're
about that
asked,
news on Micah Hudson leaving Texas Tech after 1 year? So that's crazy how, I mean, the writing was on the wall, honestly, during the regular season that this wasn't shocking because of just the way that kind of unfolded. But for all of the, man, signing a 5-star and all, like a year later, man, it's just so delicate of a situation, especially when you're not like Ohio State.
and there was a lot of conversation about from the tech side about checks not clearing when Baylor won a battle for Caleb Burns this offseason. Kind of interesting that this news happens because it kind of makes you think about that rather quickly. I think Micah Hudson's a really good player. I think Baylor would really like to land him. I also think that it's at this moment probably a little I not to say they can't, but I do think that they are a long shot. Like there's other schools that are really going to want him. I do think they're going to prioritize Micah over Jonte Cook, though. Right now, I can't predict that they're going to land them, but I do think they're going to put the effort in to try to land one of these guys, and more so Micah Hudson at this point.
Yeah, I'm not getting my hopes up. I feel like it's a fight. You go in there and you give it your best and you swing big, and hopefully you could land a knockout blow that lands you a big former 5-star wide receiver. But I think with Hudson in particular, no inside info. I just feel like he's going to go big fishing. Like, you don't go back in the portal after going to Texas Tech for a year to probably even stay in the Big 12. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's going to like Texas or wherever. He's got whatever options in front of him, so we'll see there. Jonte Cook, I don't know. Oregon always tracked with him, right? Wasn't he committed there for a while, and I don't know what his latest recruitment looks like, but it'll be interesting to see where both of those guys end up. But yeah, definitely not getting my hopes up for either guy, but doesn't mean you don't try and see what can happen. If we could make one major upgrade to McLean Stadium, what would it be?
I don't really know that I have one
Sold
specifically.
out crowds, people in
Right.
the stands. That'd be great.
People showing up would be my top upgrade too. Yeah, that's it. So whatever that means for the stadium, just getting people in the building. Yeah, that's the most important thing.
Marine Bear, do you think we have any players that decide to sit out the bowl game? We've never really had this problem with previous bowl games, but I know everything has changed with talent, transfer portal, NIL, etc. I don't see that with this group, and I don't really see anybody who I wouldn't mock mercilessly if they decided to sit out this bowl. Like, who are you to sit out this bowl game? Unless there's like an injury, obviously, then you got to protect yourself. But there's no like first round NFL draft talent, or that's putting their stock at risk by playing in this bowl game. So I don't foresee that unless there's some injuries we don't know about.
So I think the transfer portal window being from December 9th to December 22nd makes it pretty likely that Baylor's going to lose some guys before the bowl game, but I don't think it's going to be like key contributors decide to sit out, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's going to be guys who maybe didn't play this year who decide to enter the portal before the bowl game. That makes sense. I just think that that's kind of a different wrinkle to this whole thing this year with when the period is for the transfer portal period, because it used to be later in the month. So now with it being earlier, guys kind of have to make decisions whether they're going to enter before Baylor's bowl game, because Baylor won't play the bowl game before the 22nd.
Yeah, and I'm more talking about guys sitting out to
Yeah,
protect their draft stock or whatever. So those are two different things we're talking about. And he's
right.
asking about both. But yeah, I mean, there's the possibility that like your fourth string corner decides like I need to go in the portal because I'm not playing, and he's not available all of a sudden. But from my angle, I don't see anybody sitting out because they've got anything to protect. Unless again they're hurt, and then that's just a totally different thing there. So we'll see. It's an interesting question, Marine, that we'll have to track. All right, three questions to try to fit in here. Does the bowl game selection for Baylor have any impact on recruiting commits? I can assume watching us play the Aggies would be huge for an in-state game and TV rankings. I don't know about that, but does it really hurt us to play in the first responder bowl against a team like UTSA?
So I don't think it hurts Baylor one way or another how it goes, but I do think it helps Baylor to face a big brand and to beat a big brand and show you can compete against a big brand. Yes, beating UTSA is not going to move the needle much, but it's also not going to hurt you. Like recruits aren't going to be like, "Oh, you beat UTSA by 20. What a, wow, that now I'm not interested in Baylor." Like that's
I
not
don't
going to
think these
happen.
guys are. I don't think these guys are paying that close attention to non-playoff bowl games to
Right.
begin with
Yeah.
at this point. Like I mean, like I think they're paying attention, but I don't think it's like a make or break in any way for anybody. Of like, oh man, I watched the first responder bowl and you guys barely. Like I don't think that's a game that's going to swing your commitment one way or the other, if that makes sense.
Right. I do think on the flip side, though, beating an LSU, being able to put that on your resume, being able to show just even more momentum, or beating an A&M, I do think that's a bigger deal, because it's one of those things that you can show to recruits like we're on the level of SEC programs, regardless of what the SEC tells you.
Yeah, I mean that would be nice. I don't, I think it would be just a nice feather in your cap and a nice thing on
Yeah.
the resume, and maybe it turns some heads. But yeah, I don't think anybody's going to be like, I'm not going to Baylor because they played UTSA in the
Hmm.
Serve Pro Bowl, or I don't think that makes that big of a difference. But yeah, you beat a bigger team, it would be a big deal. I think it'd be bigger for fans and bragging rights than anything else to beat an A&M and somebody like that. But yeah, I do think it could do a little bit of good. Blessed won 78-70 between ASU and ISU. Which team would be more likely to win their playoff game and raise the reputation of the Big 12?
This is a great question. I kind of did the exact same thing when I picked who was going to win the Big 12, which I'm picking Iowa State to win that game. I also think Iowa State has the better chance at actually winning a playoff game. I like Kenny Dillingham a ton, but Matt Campbell has been doing this job a lot longer. I think that experience could be really big for him. They got a really good defensive coordinator as well. I think they can go into a bowl game and prepare really well to potentially win one game in the college football playoff. They won't win two, though. Neither of them will.
Yeah, I'd say probably Iowa State with Jordan Tyson hurt, but I don't feel great about them really
Yeah,
making much noise outside of just simply making it. Maybe win a game, depending on the draw.
right.
Not
If they're the
banking on
two
anything.
seed,
Yeah,
like to be one of those seeds. If they're a top 4 seed, yeah, they're not. They're not going to win a game. I don't think.
Dr. Pierce, MPH, the amount of blown coverages in the KU game was mind-boggling. I just feel like every array in the defense we've seen in the last few years has had secondary issues. Can you give me hope that this will ever get better?
I mean, every defensive. I mean, I don't agree with that in 2021, unless you're just only speaking to the last 3 years, which I guess maybe you are. I think in large part it's partly due to talent. I just don't think that they've recruited at the highest level at the position. And then on the flip side, they've had to play a lot of young guys who just weren't quite ready, weren't quite at the development point where they should have been playing a ton. You put that all together, and I think they're just a little behind in the secondary. Trying to get there, though. I think they did a good job at cornerback this offseason. I think getting Caden Jenkins back next year, he'll take a big step forward. I think safety group, you'll have guys that get older. They miss Carl Williams all year long, which really hurt them as well, I think, in their secondary. So I'm expecting them to get better. I think they'll hit the transfer portal and take a couple guys in the secondary as well, which should help bolster the talent in that area.
All right, that'll do it for us this week. I also got a DM from somebody. Um, 360 Bear, 360 BU Bear, and wanted to rank the Texas schools in order of football programs. We just don't have time for that
Mm.
today. So I'll try and tuck that away if you're listening, I saw it, and I'll try and have that when we have more time. But we just simply don't have time for that exercise today. But thank you for passing that along as well. So we'll get to that at some point. But that'll do it for us this week. Big win for the Bears to close out the regular season, 6 straight, 45-17 over Kansas, as we talked about earlier. Tomorrow, as you listen to this, which will be Wednesday, December the 4th, National Signing Day #1 will be on the air on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page and on the app and all your favorite podcast platforms. Eventually, we'll be live on YouTube and the app at 8 a.m. on Wednesday for a couple of hours to break down the Baylor signing day class. So, Grayson, with that in mind, anything before we go, any teaser, and just anything before we head out in general?
I got about 4 interviews with commits for the signing day show tomorrow. So be sure to check that out. They'll be played throughout. Craig and I will give our analysis of the recruiting class. It's obviously, this is one of my favorite times of the year every year. So very excited about it. Again, we go live at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So be sure to check us out on the YouTube channel. And then, of course, it'll be available podcast version a little bit after that. So yeah, just be sure to check that out. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so we'll be rolling through the class and getting all that in as it's a beautiful time of year. And they are obviously carrying a lot of momentum in with the 6-game win streak and feeling like they should ink most, if not all, of their class. So could be a really big day and just another building block for Dave Aranda and this program. And this time around, I think they understand they need to take advantage of momentum. Unlike in 2021 when they won the Sugar Bowl and did all of that and didn't really follow that up the way they should have. And it turned into the last couple of years and kind of having to make up for that. I think they know better this time around. Would you agree with that, hey, here's momentum. We're going to take advantage of it this time around?
They absolutely do through their recruiting class. And I think what we saw from them evaluating prospects in the transfer portal last offseason, I think it bodes really well for how they're going to be able to evaluate it this offseason as well. So, yeah, I think they're in a much better place to take advantage of the momentum that they've gained.
So got signing day tomorrow, bowl selection on Sunday. It's a busy time. And, there's basketball as well. So we'll have more to talk about next week and in the weeks to come. But that'll do it for us. For today, thank you to Garrett Ross behind the scenes for making everything happen while we're remote for this particular episode, but we will be in studio for the signing day special. So until then, less than 24 hours from now, I'll be tuning in live for that, and we'll be back to break it all down for you and with you. Until that time, Grayson Grundhoefer, Garrett Ross, I'm Craig Smoak, and this has been the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com.